All right. Good afternoon, Comms 309 class. I hope everyone is being safe, quarantining. Um, our group consists of David, Sophia, Savannah, Matt, and Sarby, and we're gonna begin our speech. And so here we go. For many of us in this class, our first exposure to having the talk occurred briefly in our sex ed classes. After the talk, assuming we all learned everything through our own experience and choices in life. And so today, our group has decided and chose to talk to you guys about the sex education. Um, and we chose to do our topic on sex education because, well, for one thing, teen pregnancies rates are high and STD rates amongst teens are skyrocketing. And studies from USC Nursing shows that 15 to 24 of SEDs make up 25% of the American population, and basically all the teens account for 50% of all the new SEDs reported. And for us as a group, our specific purpose is to inform you, the audience, about how sex education is taught in high schools. And for us, as together, we're thinking like, what is a good topic to talk about? And we concluded to sex education because growing up, for all of us in our group, the way that we were taught sex ed was not that informative, and um, yeah, and we see that as something that should be talked about and shed some light upon. And so, yeah, we're going to be talking about sex education and the conflicting attitude towards sex ed, and which can affect future youths to come along. And so we're going to pass it on and move on.
Matt, we can't hear you. I think your mic is off.
Okay, so I'm going to be talking about our first point about sex education, and that's going to be how sex education is taught. Now, this might not be a question that you'd normally have in your mind about sex education because you don't normally question it. You're like, well, there people who come in and taught me, they're older than me, they've had sex, they know what it's about, they could teach me about it. But uh, for to go more specific into how sex education is taught, I wanted to talk about how it's implemented into schools, what could be implemented now that the world and the society around us has sort of advanced into the technological era, as well as who it's being taught by, and just to give you some overall education about sex education. So first, I'd like to talk about when should sex education be implemented? And I think after going over our research that a lot of it is, I'd say it starts at a good age where it is now. I remember personally for myself, it was probably around fifth, fourth, fifth grade, fourth grade when they started coming in, showing us the videos. And I think that's a good age. It's right about when your hormones start, when you start to go through puberty and everything. So I feel that they got it spot on. They know when they should be implementing it. But how many, like the amount of, let me start over on that point. For the amount of places that are implementing it right now, I don't think that it would be enough, even though they got the timing right, because we know that only about 24 states and DC are required to teach sex education. That means over half of our country is not required to teach the youth about sexual education, something that's very important for safety and overall well-being, you know? And so, uh, when you're growing up, you need to be well informed because we all know when you're young, you make dumb decisions. You're stupid. You like to go out and do these things that aren't necessarily the safest for you. And I feel like only more of these instances will be happening if you don't educate yourself properly. So some of the methods that I remember being used and that I've read about being used are obviously the gender-specific videos. You'd always have like your teacher saying, okay, girls, go outside, have some fun for like 5 minutes while the boys watch their video. And so you'd be sitting there watching your video with all the other boys or girls in the class. And I guess I understood it for the time being because we were also young and immature, making dumb statements. But then besides those videos, the only other sexual education I ever came into contact with was my high school health course, which didn't teach me that much about safety, more just about it did teach me about like STDs and stuff, but more just about like just the basics but oversimplified. You know, they gave me more detail about the basics. And then as there's also another form of sex education being taught, which is abstinence until marriage, which is not getting involved until you're married, so as to stay safe 100%. And I think it's an effective strategy, but most people in the modern times don't really want to stay abstinent. And so, speaking of modern times, I'd like to talk about some issues that I think should start to be addressed in more modern health classes, like the issues of the internet and being safe online, as well as something that's really big right now, and that's consent. Consent should be asked whenever you do anything, really. And the last point I'd like to talk about would also be who's teaching your sex ed classes. I don't remember ever having a sexual education professional come into my fifth grade class and talk about the video. It was always like my gym teacher or like a biology teacher or science teacher or something like that. Not really a professional in the sense. And so I'll be passing it on to, I believe, Sarbi, right? Or Savannah?
Sophia, actually.
Sophia? Okay. Like a 20%
Okay, so
chance.
now we've kind of talked about how it's kind of being taught, what's going on right now. Kind of want to shift gears towards how different groups see sex ed, how necessary it is, and how it should be taught according to these groups. So first, I want to talk about doctors and healthcare professionals in general. So according to several articles, but specifically the Department of Nursing at USC, most doctors in general agree that the quantity of sexual education as well as the general quality is directly correlated with, as we mentioned earlier, rising STDs and teen pregnancy in younger people in general. We also believe that the quality is not as good as it should be, in the sense that most curricula don't go into specific details about sex education, either keeping it very, very clinical, very impersonal, and kind of staying away from the more embarrassing topics. And speaking of embarrassing topics, it's kind of the general attitude that students have towards sex ed is a very, very embarrassing topic, and maybe something that you, the audience, would think of. So according to various other studies and one published by the British Medical Journal, many students also feel that they aren't being taught enough, or that the content is also too formal or clinical, kind of like what Matt was saying earlier about how you just kind of sit in a room and watch a video and that kind of seems to be it. There's generally a taboo towards having conversations about things like sex or sexual orientation or relationships or things like that. It's very much strictly like biology or something along those lines. And another group that tends to have a very different view from the previous two is religious groups or religion in general, especially among religious parents. So they generally feel that it is up to the parents to teach children about sex, about abstinence, and this is more coming from more of a Christian perspective. According to this website, the CatholicParents.org, they highlighted their beliefs towards this issue. I believe that it ignores, or sex ed ignores, individual differences when it comes to this type of education, in the sense that students are prepared for other subjects, like you're prepared for each level in math. But when it comes to this topic, it's pretty much impossible to tell whether a student is physically or psychologically prepared for a topic such as this. I believe it also ignores and attacks religious faith of students, especially those who were taught abstinence or chastity at home, and now they have to listen to a teacher contradict these beliefs that they grew up learning. Another argument that they make is that it's impossible to make sex ed an objective topic, because no matter what you do, someone is going to feel uncomfortable or feel that their beliefs are being violated or their opinions are being violated, or they're just going to feel generally very uncomfortable. And it's very hard to make this a comfortable environment to be taught in. So with those attitudes in mind, gonna move on to our next point, which I believe is Sarbi.
Yes, it is. Thank you, Sophia. As we all know now, sex ed is very important because it gives tips and lessons to young adults for them to be aware about STIs, early pregnancy, and unwanted pregnancies. STIs are a growing health concern among adolescents. One of the most common STIs in adolescents is HIV. HIV destroys the body's immune system or its ability to fight off infections. Like any other STIs, HIVs are usually transmitted because of unprotected sex. Many teens don't know the consequences of having unprotected sex because they lack the knowledge. Simply because sex ed is not being taught in schools. And people with STIs, especially HIV, can be very susceptible to many different life-threatening diseases such as cancer. A lack of sex education contributes to high teenage pregnancy rates. According to the World Health Organization, there are 21 million girls 15 to 19 years and 2 million girls under 15 years that become pregnant each year. Moreover, 16 million girls 15 to 19 years and 2.5 million girls under 16 years give birth. Adolescent pregnancy may increase the risk of infection because teens usually do not receive proper prenatal care, and pregnancy can make them more vulnerable. In fact, some adolescents may have a higher risk of death from disease because of pregnancy at a young age. This does also make their immune system weak. A lack of sex education contributes to high pregnancy rates, and this can be solved by increasing the knowledge of sex education worldwide. Many high school and college students face unwanted pregnancies that, because they're not taught to make healthy sex decisions, unwanted pregnancies can also increase the number of abortion cases. Abortions are generally safe, but in some cases can be very dangerous to the mother. Sex ed is very necessary to be taught in schools because knowledge in sex can be used for a lifetime. Every person has a right to be educated in order to protect themselves from infections and diseases that they might face when having unprotected intercourse. Proper knowledge in sexuality education can help people develop healthy relationships with a partner, gender identity, and reproductive knowledge. I believe having sex education as a subject in school also makes students more open-minded with topics like this. So instead of laughing off the topic of sex, they will learn to discuss and engage in this topic. And Savannah now will wrap our presentation up.
Thank you, Sarbi. In conclusion, we have informed you all about the importance of sex education in our schools. As David stated earlier, for many of us in this class, our very first exposure to the talk is from the sex educational classes. The topic of sex education is not only extremely important to college students, but significant to our entire population, which is why today we have discussed with you all about the past ways sex education has been taught, the different attitudes towards sex education, and why sex education is necessary. It is important to be informed about these things because the main hope of a nation lies in the proper education of its youth. Thank you.
Thank you.